Now about the airline comparison, the first one is Emirates, created in Dubai in 1985. They cut about 10% of their workforce during the pandemic episode, but this could rise to 15%, which represent more than 90,000 of jobs. This famous airline also made major organizational changes to be able to continue flying. So the first one is that they wanted to accept only vaccinated people, first to celebrate the advance of vaccination, but also allowing crews to remain active. The second one is that flight personnel must be vaccinated or paid for a COVID test before each flight or be suspended. And the last one is the digital health passport test to test all the passengers for COVID-19. The second one is Qantas, the Australian airline created in 1920. They also had to fire employees during the COVID-19 because of the huge loss. But they're also still very creative to attract people during this episode. That's why they set up mystery flights to encourage passengers to travel with the airline, so the destination is not known and the passenger have to give some clues during the flight. They also made the smart choice of decreasing the number of students at the Qantas Pilotage Academy and studied the possibility of a new site to maintain the number of graduates while respecting social distancing. And the last one is that they also attend with Japan to facilitate post-pandemic tourism recovery, at least between New Zealand, Australia, and Japan.
So we also worked on two other airlines in order to do this case, which are KLM and Japan Airlines. So on the one hand, we have KLM that has been founded in 1919, and its headquarters that are located in Netherlands. So like other companies, the health situation due to COVID had negative effects on KLM. Since more than 1 year now, there are less and less numerous flights, and a lot of people are not able to work anymore. So due to this pandemic and due to this situation, KLM decided to fire some of their employees. So according to the KLM website, we can count nearly 6,000 dismissals over the past year. This is the biggest organizational and negative organizational change that KLM had to set up. But on the contrary, the company decided to create organizational change in order to facilitate the travel of each passenger during the crisis. So one of the first changes that they made a partnership with Delta in order to offer COVID-tested flights from Atlanta to Amsterdam that will allow eligible customers to be exempt from quarantine when arriving in Netherlands. And the second change is that they created an application that is tested today in several flights to allow passengers to securely register their COVID tests. And this application has been created to improve the customer experience by streamlining the testing process that has been and that has become mandatory since the beginning of the crisis. So, on the other hand, we have now Japan Airlines that has been founded in 1951 and that its headquarters are in 3 different countries, China, Korea, and Japan. This airline has also suffered from the pandemic, but unlike KLM, they completely refused to fire employees because their first objective is to protect jobs. So, however, they also made organizational change in order to adapt themselves to the crisis and to the pandemic. So the first change is that they retired part of their Boeing because of the pandemic and because there were less and less flights. The second change is that the company decided to do a partnership with Uber in order to have a better travel experience for passengers. So the Uber icon is displayed on the application of Japan Airlines, and it permits to passengers to request Uber services at the arrival airport for a ride, for example, or takeout services. And finally, to facilitate the recovery of the tourism after the pandemic and the COVID-19, Qantas and Japan Airlines decided to form a joint venture to better serve travelers from New Zealand, Australia and Japan when the international flights will resume.
Now, let's talk about two low-cost companies, the British EasyJet and the Spanish Vueling. Concerning employees' dismissal, EasyJet cuts off nearly 30% of its staff to face the crisis. As for Vueling, no figures are available yet, but articles said that the company is working at 50% staff capacity and job cuts are looming large. In fact, this company is part of the IAG Alliance, and the group has announced that it will cut off nearly 12,000 jobs just for British Airways. So, as we can see, employee dismissal isn't a big issue. Every company faces it, which is rather logical in this crisis due to the global air traffic reduction. As for organizational changes during the COVID-19 crisis, well, both companies forced their passengers to submit a negative test made at least 72 hours before the flight. Also, both companies have published a guide to help customers with safety measures during this period. Moreover, Vueling has obtained from the Spanish government a 260 million loan to help the companies to face the crisis. As for EasyJet, well, the company has announced that they will cut off a part of their fleet due to the traffic reduction. This has helped them to face the crisis, but it was not enough, and for the first time in its history, the company recorded a loss.
The airline industry has seen these last few years a general development of the communication system, which was mainly due to the adoption of information technology. During the COVID-19 crisis, many of these airlines had to communicate their new policies and decisions about employee dismissal and their organizational changes within the company to the different stakeholders. Emirates is one of these airlines that improved their communication strategy and evolved to a more sophisticated one. The company relies much on sophisticated information communication technology as the most reliable strategy for its communication purposes with all of its stakeholders. However, there is no information about their employee dismissal on their web pages during the pandemic, which is probably because of their communication process, which is hierarchical, implying that decisions are made by the top management and then passed to the subordinate staff, but also because their communication system is more developed for their internal stakeholders. Nevertheless, President of Emirates Airlines, Tim Clark, stated that his company has cut a tenth of its workforce during the coronavirus pandemic in layoffs that could rise to 15% or 9,000 jobs. As for the organizational changes, Emirates was sure to communicate some of the changes the company implemented during the pandemic in their website, mainly to inform customers about their initiatives to increase safety during travels. One of these communications was a video made by the company that explained how they enhanced safety and hygiene measures on both the ground and on board, such as continuous health checks for the crew, social distancing rule, and frequent sanitizations of the plane. On the other hand, Qantas Airways' communication to its external stakeholders is much more pronounced than Emirates. Indeed, the company's website holds several statements of Alan Joyce, the chief executive officer, and the company affirms and claims that it always came back from a crisis stronger than before. Throughout their long history, the company faced many periods of upheavals, uncertainty, and dealt with many sudden crises and shock. The company also shares that this means that some 200 Qantas and Jetstar aircrafts will be grounded for a significant period of time, and at least 6,000 job losses and extended stand-downs for thousands of employees until more flying returns. Nevertheless, the company declared to its stakeholders that it entered the crisis in better shape than most airlines and that it has some of the best prospects for recovery. Indeed, Qantas outlined in June 2020 a 3-year plan to accelerate this recovery and ensure the future success of the Qantas Group. It is through this plan that the company intends to get more people back to work and their businesses back to profit and growth. The recovery plan is focused on 3 main immediate actions, which is the first one is to recapitalize through a $1.4 billion equity raising to strengthen its financial resilience. The second point is to right-size its workforce, fleet, and other costs according to demand projections, with the ability to scale up as flying returns. The last point is to restructure to deliver ongoing cost savings and efficiencies across its operations. KLM's communication strategy is also clearly stated in their webpage, and the company declared that owing to the effects of the corona pandemic, it is preparing for an extended period during which fewer flights will be operated. The organization also will become much more smaller and less costly, as well as more sustainable, economical, and efficient. And in terms of labor costs, KLM stated that it has already achieved savings by shedding jobs. It also has downsized by way of various measures, including non-renewal of short-term contracts and a voluntary resignation scheme. And by the end of the year, KLM is expected to employ around 4,500 fewer people than it did before the coronavirus pandemic. The company also declares that further cutbacks cannot be excluded in view of the magnitude and gravity of the situation, but also assures that it also has reached agreement on social plan with trade unions for ground personnel and cabin crew. Moreover, KLM announced in their website that the company came up with a restructuring plan which outlines how KLM intends to overcome the worst crisis that it has seen in almost 101 years of operation, and they explain how they intend to fulfill the conditions imposed by the Netherlands government. The plan here is currently under review at the ministry, but according to the website of KLM, the plan includes elements such as the reassessment of strategy, cost-cutting initiatives, financial considerations, and also KLM states that its staff will contribute by way of reduced employment conditions.
First, about the employee dismissal. Unlike the other aviation corporation, Japan Airlines has been floored by the pandemic. The pandemic has forced the aviation industry to shed hundreds of jobs globally. But Japan Airlines is maintaining most of its workforce. I think a corporate culture in Japan tends to be more skewed toward job security and a central plank of their recovering plan. It makes them focus on the happiness of staff rather than shareholders. Secondly, about the organizational change. Japan Airlines has a COVID-19 cover strategy, which is eligible for the passengers who are 31 days after the departure date of the first international journey. If they test positive for COVID-19 overseas, the cover will pay the returning cost to their countries of residence, the cost of medical expense and medication, and the cost of isolation. And the cost will be paid directly to the hospital, medical centers, or other medical facilities. And about EasyJet. EasyJet rules that face masks must be worn at the airport at the gate when boarding the aircraft and throughout the flight. If you have an exemption from wearing a mask, you must bring a doctor's letter, which can clearly state you are exempt, and you may be required to complete a healthy declaration from online or bring confirmation with you to the airport. Failure to do so could result in you being refused travel or denied entry to your destination. And in the end, for the wearing, in order to avoid quick, it's better to check in online, as most airlines offer this option. The way you will be able to bring your boarding pass from home. You won't have to stay at check-in desk, but even if you have to check in your luggage, it's still the faster option, and you should download the app. You won't have to use paper, and you can show your boarding pass on your phone when you go through securities and when boarding the plane.
So after comparing the different communication strategies between our 6 airlines, we noticed that Emirates stood out. First of all, the company is present on several and different channels of communications, such as interview, ads on TV, social networks, a newsletter and article on its website. In addition to be very present on several channels, the company is very effective and successful indeed. Emirates is very present and appreciated on social networks. More than 5 million fans on Instagram and more than 10 million on Facebook. And the company also publishes posts quite frequently and is very reassuring and detailed on issues related to the COVID-19 crisis on its website and on its Instagram and Facebook accounts. So we think Emirates is applying the best communication strategy by being very present on various communication channels and especially on the internet. When we know that the internet and social media have the power to break borders between countries, we see that Emirates Airlines is making the good choice here.